OK, let's explore even some of those points you've listed. You mentioned education. Your 4-year plan talks about education and attracting international students to Ireland. Yet, for instance, a simple measure for the Chinese to come here and study here and get a visa. They have to jump through all sorts of hoops. And a little measure like that could have been streamlined and was pointed out after you published the 4-year plan. It could have easily been introduced in your manifesto, but no, there's nothing new here.
No, I think the most important part to remember here is we have to focus on the scarce resources we have, and that has to be said that one of our most, I suppose, successful aspects of our policy has been the attraction of foreign direct investment. And again, to very make the point that the idea is trying to have created almost 11,000 new jobs in 2010. That's, I think, a commitment and a guarantee that the policy we are pursuing are working. This is, in fact, a double the previous year's performance of 4,600 jobs. I think that a very important part in the whole job creation element has to be the continuous support of manufacturers to realise that our exports are now on the increase for the second year running. That's the real economy at work, and that's where
yes, but
our
it's a type of economy that people who are on the dole queues at the moment from the construction sector and so on will find it very hard to migrate into these high-skilled R&D science exporting companies.
Well, I don't believe so, Will, because I think there's other aspects where we're not just targeting the foreign direct investment aspect, we're also talking about the boost to tourism, for instance.
Yes, you talk about achieving 8 million tourists, international tourists, in 2011. Mm-hmm. You talk about competitive airport charges, and yet the travel tax has been retained. In fact, the biggest idea you seem to have in attracting tourists is turning St. Patrick's Day into a fortnight.
Not at all. That's being very simplistic about it.
Perhaps you can challenge me on it then.
Well,
what other ideas
I just say I wouldn't wind up by suggesting that the most important plank of our policy is extending the Patrick's Day Festival. Far from it.
OK, well, how will you attract 8 million tourists to the country this year?
First of all, it's important to make the point that we're targeting the very fact of it, when we're breaking it down into the various areas of Europe and the states we're talking about. We're talking about, as it were, creating more festivities surrounding each, let me say, area of importance throughout the state. Also involving the private sector more, working with government by way of promoting leisure, by way of promoting the aspects of Ireland that we have never been to the fore about. We're talking about more involvement along with the local authorities coming into being, along with the tourism sector, and more importantly, an aspect that has been forgotten about for years, the very people who have invested themselves from their own resources in tourism, having a combined effort, as it were, to have planned holidays here rather than tourists just arriving in Dublin Airport.
But have Fáilte Ireland and the various other promotional agencies been sitting on their backsides for the last few years, or have they not been doing precisely what you've talked about?
No organisation can claim that they've been doing the right thing 100% for the last 12 years. We're in an economy that is under serious threat economically. So clearly every aspect of development and investment has to be challenged and changed. And that's what this is about. It's not just good enough to suggest for a minute that we are satisfied with the tourism numbers coming into the country. It's an attempt to recognise that tourism was a great boost to this economy over the years.
You're not talking about measures that would reduce the cost of tourism. If a tourist comes here and they're selecting Ireland among a list of other countries, they look at prices, they look at, for instance, our airport tax, there are no measures here to make it any more cost, to raise a cost incentive for them to visit Ireland.
The airport tax has not been considered by way of deterrent to tourism. First of all, it's also a measure that's generated throughout Europe and indeed the Western world. Our tax charges and landing charges are much in line with everywhere else. Besides that point I have to make to you, of course we're investing in tourism and recognising that the combination of all the resources, we must be more dynamic and be more focusful. That's what we're about.
OK, let's look at some other aspects of business. Tourism is one of the planks of your policy, but if we look at the complaints that companies make about rents, about regulatory costs, local authority fees, water charges, fuel costs, on page 8 of your manifesto, you say the priorities are to drive down business costs. So why haven't you done anything to address it before now?
Because this is our manifesto. We go forward, we're asked to prepare a new programme for government. That's exactly what we're doing.
You've been in government for almost 4 years, so why now?
Well, for the last 4 years, we have been dealing with the onset of this recession. We've been restoring and making every attempt to restore our national finances. That's what this is a bit about. It's about reforming the cost of government. We've already talked about reform of politics in government, and we're also talking about reduce the overall cost of government for the people. That's been part of it, but more importantly has been trying to restore the national finances and reducing, as it were, the huge difficulty on the public public finances.
Okay, but many of the jobs that have been lost in this country have been lost through small enterprises going to the wall. And you're saying that your eye has been off the ball for that sector for the last 2.5 years since this banking crisis emerged.
I'm saying that our eye has been very firmly on the ball, faced with the rapid deterioration of public finances.
Okay, well, maybe you can list some of the measures you've done to help businesses in the last 2.5 years.
Well, first of all, I can deal with the overall question you posed to me. The very fact that in 6 separate budgetary adjustments going back as far as July of 2008, we've had to make savings and raise revenues of value of over 20 billion.
Yeah, but the question, since you want to come back to the question was about what you have done to help small businesses, and did you have your eye off the ball for the small enterprise sector for the last 2.5 years? So maybe you can list some of the measures you have taken to help companies.
Well, first of all, I cannot go along with suggesting for a sec we have our eye off the ball. I acknowledge the huge difficulties on the small business by way of rents and rates, and again, that's our proposal coming forward.
Right, and in the last 2.5 years you've done what to help them?
Well, I would say that the policies underpinning the national plan is a series of investments initially to increase the number of jobs. We're talking in terms of direct support by way of exports. That's what we've been doing.
No. The last 2.5 years, let's judge you on your record first of all. What have you done in the last 2.5 years to help small businesses?
We have, by way of the bank support to small business, where we secured 12 billion fund for small businesses. That has been the mainstay of our party policy.
So you've done nothing to bring down costs?
I have to say that we have tried to reduce the overall costs of energy costs and whatever, but specifically they're the main areas.
Was that by raising a carbon tax?
It was.
To reduce business cost?
No,
by raising a carbon tax?
By raising a carbon tax to try to reduce the overall cost of fuel, by making people more alert and aware of the need to as it were, be more efficient by way of costs.
One final area of spending is capital expenditure, and some of the infrastructural projects mentioned are Metro North, Dart Interconnector, and some vague commitment about making public transport more accessible. So no projects for outside the big cities then?
Well, again, that's ignoring the very fact of the capital spend we've had over the last number of years, from 1997 to 2008. I think it's fair to make the point the huge investments on road infrastructure, water and sewage, again, essential elements of any growing economy.
Right, but what you propose to do over the next 5 years, if elected to government, is focus on the Metro North, the Dart Interconnector, making public transport more accessible. So again, are there no projects in the future that will be for outside the city areas?
Of course there are. There are many projects by way of our capital plan toward water and sewage investment and also our roads infrastructure. This is a continuous programme, not at the same level as we've had before, but I think it's folly to ignore the level of investment we've had that is now part of our reconstruction of local economies by way of our direct access to main ports. This can't be taken in isolation. This is very important to believe that the investment we've brought together will be part of the national recovery.
All right, let's move on to political reform, the third and final part of your document. One quote: "In terms of sitting time, there is no evidence that simply increasing the number of days where the houses or committees of the Oireachtas meet will make any significant change in the quality of debate, fiscal policy or legislation." Now, considering it was your party that reduced sitting days during its term in government, can you forgive people for being cynical about that statement?
Well, I wasn't aware, Will, that we reduced our sitting times in government. That has not been the case.
But the Dáil does not sit for nearly as many days as it did in 1997.
No, the Dáil sits Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays. That's a given, but that's not my excuse. My reality is that, of course, there must be reform of the government system, and I go fully along with Micheál Martin's proposals as to how we can do just that. I think all governments and all parliaments throughout the world have realised that the old ways aren't, I suppose, conducive to proper governance, and we've now recognised, and I go along with these proposals by way of cabinet ministers acting outside of Parliament, as it were, devoting their time to policy making and, more importantly, devoting their time to implementing government policy. I go along with that change.
So under this plan, somebody like Michael O'Leary or any prominent business figure could be a member of the cabinet. How would they be selected?
Well, I understand it maybe by way of the list system that operates in some European countries, I think Germany and France. So in other words, a TD going for election would make the point that his reserve or his, let me say, running mate, for want of a better word, the minister or the person obviously going for election would be selected, and basically he would have a reserve, and the reserve would act in the Dáil. Right,
no, I think we're maybe getting confused. Somebody like Michael O'Leary, who doesn't run for election, could in theory be part of the cabinet under this reform. How would he be selected, though?
I would presume that each party leader would have his selections named publicly documented before an election, to say that this would be the route he would be drawing from, based of course on the level of political support he'd have. He'd be able to draw on a percentage of that list. This has happened in many jurisdictions. I don't see any great difficulty with it. It'd be something new to us, obviously.
But how would this person, if it's a Michael O'Leary or whoever, be held to account? Because if you're a minister at the moment and you make a balls of your portfolio, then the electorate 5 years down the road will hold you to account.
Yeah, well, the only difference would be that in the case of the name you just mentioned, let me say the same example, Michael O'Leary would not participate in Dáil votes, but would have to be accountable for all actions of his or her department, as it were, whoever the minister might be. So I see a level of accountability there. The manifesto very clearly goes on to make the point that upon election or selection, the minister with acting cabinet would be responsible to the Dáil for questions. The only difference would be if the person would not be allowed to vote.
Just on the final point, you support the abolition of the Seanad. So why was your party so aghast at the idea when Fine Gael first made the suggestion, and now you're all for it?
Well, first of all, Will, it's fair to make the point. We keep saying that it's not politics as usual. We're asked now to bring forward a proposal for the reform of the overall Oireachtas. We make the point that we see the abolition of the Senate as part of that. I don't see.
And when did you come around to that idea?
When did I come about to it?
Well, Fianna Fáil.
Well, I'd say that it came about as we put together the manifesto, and also we listened to many people over the last number of months as we listened to public debate, let it be on radio, TV, or on our door-to-door canvassing.
So you saw Fine Gael get a positive reaction and thought, well, we like that idea.
It's not a matter, Will, of parties following or copying what other parties are doing. It's parties making up their mind what they think is the best way forward.
Is there any merit to reforming the Seanad rather than abolishing it outright?
Well, there might be, and I think that's part of it. And many people are aghast at the whole notion of just abolishing the Senate for the sake of it. Maybe reduce Senate, and there's often talk in terms of getting back to the old model proposed by De Valera, of maybe a more vocational model, as it were. I think the greatest complaint nowadays is the very fact that it's confined maybe to public reps, voting for public reps. But I would see certain sense in having a second house, as it were, validating legislation going through the Dáil.
Okay. How much will Micheál Martin be paid if he becomes Taoiseach under this plan?
I suspect 230,000, I think is the figure.
Why doesn't Fianna Fáil favour reducing the Taoiseach salary and ministerial salaries in line with Fine Gael? They're talking about €200,000 per year for the Taoiseach.
Well, it's up to each party to bring forward this manifesto. Again, it's not by way of copying what
why doesn't Fianna Fáil like the idea of paying the Taoiseach a little bit less?
I would suspect that this issue has been considered and dealt with within the party, that is. And I suspect
so Micheál Martin fancies himself as the L'Oreal Taoiseach.
I can't say that, Will. I can't be that glib about it. I didn't speak to him directly about it, nor did I go through these. I certainly wouldn't believe that Micheál Martin comes across as being a very ordinary individual. Well, able to put his point of view. I don't think he's in that sort of league.
Junior Minister John Moloney, thanks for taking our call today.
Thank you for the opportunity.